Hands up if at some time in your photographic voyage you've been left somewhat frustrated with the results of your image making. In your mind's eye you see a beautiful rendition of the scene before you, only to end up with lost and underexposed details in the shadows and/or overblown highlights. One way of getting around this issue is to adopt a technique known as HDR or High Dynamic Range Photography. The main goal of HDR photography is to take a selection of images, normally 3, 5 or 7 individual shots, each taken at determined and equally spaced exposure values, positive and negative, around a correctly exposed image. For example, if we have a sequence of 5 images with exposure values set at 1 EV distances, our images will be taken at -2 exposure value, -1, 0 or exposed correctly, +1 and +2 exposure values. This will then result in a series of 5 images, each with different luminosity characteristics relating to the high and low light areas within the scene. We then edit the scene in order to create a final image that allows us to accomplish an aesthetic of apparent luminosity greater than that which the camera can natively accomplish in one shot, hence the term high dynamic range. HDR imaging has become increasingly popular in recent times due to the specific look it can offer to benefit a scene, such as those required by real estate imaging and urban decay scenes such as industrial plants and abandoned buildings. This technique in itself is pretty straightforward, and one that is simplified when using the HDR mode of the Miops Trigger system. So come on, let's head out into the urban side of life in Yokohama, Japan, and check out some HDR imaging possibilities. Once shot, I will then also quickly be touching on how I edit my final images. Okay, we're going to turn the system on. You've seen already that it comes up straight away, goes into lightning mode. To scroll through to HDR, we simply use the main dial here. We're on HDR, so we'll enter into there. Okay, this goes to default setting. It's on center 1, EV ±1 and 5 shots. Okay, let's get it to how we want it. I'm actually going to have I'm going to start from the bottom. 5 shots, my exposure value plus and minus is going to be, let's say, half a second. Oh, sorry, half a stop. Okay, and then we go up to the top. My center is going to be 1/15. Okay, so that relates to my 1/15 of a second for my exposed correctly shot. Okay, and from there, all we need to do then is to fire the Miops, and it should send the 5 signals to the camera in order to take the 5 bracketed shots that are going to be used then and merged together in order to create my high dynamic range final result. I've got a series of filters. I'm actually going to use an ND8 and these are from Kenko. I've got an ND8, an ND4 and an ND2 just because I want to cut down as dramatically as possible the amount of light going into the camera. So quite simply I'll just screw one of these on. Sunshade back on. In order to use the Miops in HDR mode, you need the trigger to be able to control the camera. Okay, because if you remember, we set the center value at 1/15 of a second, and with the exposure bias or the plus and minus exposure values on either side of that exposed shot, the camera, the trigger needs to be able to have manual control over the camera. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to work in bulb mode. Okay, I don't want to be that shallow. I want to be up around 5.6. So I'm going to put it on ISO 16, let's see, it's down 320. This is pretty much how I had it set up in manual earlier on. Okay, so once we turn the Miops on, you'll know straight away that we go into lightning mode. There it is there. To get to HDR, we scroll through. There we are, and then enter. So we're shooting 5 frames. Our exposure bias, plus and minus, is half a stop, and our center exposed image is at 1/15 of a second. I've got those settings set into the camera. I'm in bulb mode, so let's trigger this puppy. Okay, we can fire it manually, and quite simply how we do that is by pushing the center enter button. And there are your 5 exposures. From there we would go to editing, but in this modern age we obviously like to have modern ways of playing with our toys, and so like many other electronic devices we can control it with our smart device. The Miops itself has its own app, which I'm using on my iPhone. Here, by tapping that, it will go into the detection screen mode, and there is my Miops there. If I tap onto that, it then brings up all of the scenarios for firing the Miops trigger on the left hand side. You can scroll up and down through them. I'm shooting HDR, so let's get to HDR. Where is it? Laser time, HDR, there you go. Okay, now I need to set up my app to reflect the parameters that I've got set on my Miops trigger. Half a second, well, 15th of a second, my exposure value plus and minus, hold on, bullet train. Oh well, looks like we're underneath a bullet train bridge. Anyway, so the spacings for my exposure value plus and minus is going to be half an exposure value. Okay, and my frames, I'm going to be taking 5 shots. Okay, so now we're good to go. All I need now to do is to fire the trigger, and by the way that I do that, quite simply, is by pushing start here. There you go. So that was shooting HDR with using the iPhone app. One more time. Very cool. Okay, well here we are. This is the, we're going to go into the edit now, and I'm going to use the software for HDR editing, Photomatix Pro. It's my go-to software that I use. And up here in the top left hand corner it asks me to load bracketed shots or bracketed photos. So let's select a series of 5 images that I shot at the first location. I'm going to load those. You can see that I'm using the Canon RAW format, CR2, which is no problem. When I load those bracketed shots, a few things that ask me here: align source images, crop aligned images, whether it's taken on a tripod or handheld. For stability, I always shoot HDR on a tripod. You know, if you're going to shoot HDR, a series of 5 shots, you know, don't go to all of the hassle of getting to the location, and you know, setting up the whole sequence and then shooting it by hand. You're prone to shake. You're prone to getting ghost images on the layered shots. So use a tripod. It takes a couple of seconds, and it will save you a lifetime of problems. But if you do decide to go handheld, there is an option for that. You can then tell instruct Photomatix Pro to include perspective correction, to what amount. You can also select show options to remove ghosts. Okay, but to avoid all of that, I simply take my shots on a tripod. I reduce my noise on underexposed images at 100%, again, personal preference. Reduce chromatic aberrations. If they're around, then yeah, you don't want them in the final image. Balance as shot. If you forgot to set your white balance when you were shooting, you can readjust it here. I'm going to say we're in the shade because we were under a bridge. Okay, and my color primaries are based on sRGB. I'm happy with that. Align and merge. Merging to HDR, here we go. So it's going to give me the first rendition of what it believes to be a default high dynamic range shot. Here we go. And there you have it. The Photomatix Pro user interface springs to life. And all we have here is the first rendition of how Photomatix Pro thinks this high dynamic range image should be. Okay, now let's start on the left hand side. Up here we have tone mapping. We also have an option for exposure fusion if we want to work with just the fusion of exposures. I'm not really into that. I generally tend to work more in tone mapping. Scaling simply relates to the image on the screen. I want to have it as big as possible, so I have it normally about there. If it gets any bigger, yeah, that's fine. Just gives me the ability to, let's go to the maximum. There you go, 150. I've got a nice big wide screen there, so make the use of it. Okay, on the left hand side here we have our sliders for all of our settings that we may wish to change, and down here you'll see in this little dialog box, every time we mouse over the control of a slider, it will give us the detail or the prompt as to what that slider can accomplish. So strength affects the amount of enhancement given to contrast, blah, 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 blah. And so on and so forth with each slider. If we're unsure of what each slider does, by ghosting across it like this, it will give you a prompt as to what that slider does. Okay, so there's all your options for change. Your lighting adjustments if you want to change the lighting, and you'll see the changes happen pretty much instantly once you select those. Okay, let's say for argument's sake we're going to stay in the medium option. Every time you change a slider's characteristic, it will, once you release the mouse, it will give you that rendition. Okay, now over here on the right hand side we have all of the default settings that come loaded with Photomatix Pro when you first get the software. Now with any software, you can, if you're so inclined, you can purchase or find free downloads for additional presets. Okay, and here are my presets here, and you can see here again by once I click on them, the changes are made. And there's a whole bunch. I can scroll up or down here, and you can see there's a whole bunch of different aesthetics that you should use simply as a benchmark to start off your edit. If you are into the posters in Chinese restaurants as mentioned, is something for you. Or ooh, crikey, there you go, even more. But as you go down through these presets, hopefully you'll stumble across a setting that you like, or an aesthetic that you like, and it's not necessarily has to be drenched in color. Black and white HDR also works. I like this idea of black and white. I think that's pretty cool. But let's go to the color. I generally tend to prefer these settings here, which are the painterly presets. Go for the first ones. It's not too harsh, and we can also work with that and increase or reduce the effect as we go on. Okay, so you can first off you can go up. You can set how much effect you want, the strength of that effect. I'm going to back off by about 20%, come down to 80. color saturation, I'm just going to bring it out a bit. But I do personally, I like more contrast in my imaging. Might be a little bit, appear to be a little bit darker, but I guess I kind of like it like that. Okay, highlights here, and this relates to this area here. Now what you'll notice is with Photomatix Pro, whenever your mouse is on the image, you get this little detailed or dotted box that follows you around. This is your loop. Yeah, so if I put that over any area of the image and click, it then expands that area so that you can get a closer idea, an understanding of what's going on in that image. Here you can see there's a bit of noise, only to be expected with HDR, but also sadly a little bit of sensor dust, so I'm going to have to clean my sensor a little bit later. But any aspect of the image that you want to have a better look at, you just simply click onto it and it will give you an expanded view right here. So it's a great way to check all of the really fine details of the images as you go and continue into your edit. Okay. Okay, so again with the sliders, if by smoothing highlights there, I can get rid of a little bit of the darkness that's created in the highlights when you merge with the other images. You can change the white points. You can change your black points to get back some of the contrasted areas after changing your highlights. And here, if you're not happy with the temperature of the white balance setting, you can readjust here to your heart's desire. I kind of like that. Smoothing, I generally tend not to use too much smoothing because in my mind I think it removes the gritty feel of HDR, especially in an urban setting. So I generally tend to leave it around about 5. Now if you want, you can also set these values manually. I generally tend to play around with the sliders. Saturation, highlights and shadows. I'm happy with this image as a starter point for my main edit, or for the remainder of my edit, which will be done in Photoshop. So I'll go ahead and save that. I'll apply, and it will then go into saving the image with all of the settings that I've made. And from there, once it's done, now it's going to save this as a 16-bit TIFF file, so uncompressed. All the data is there. I then save the image, so file, save. You can also do keyboard shortcuts if you like. I generally tend to keep the file name here, but just put a precursor. So I'll put bridge, and I'll define where I'm going to keep that. Let's put it back into the original folder so I know where it is. And you can see here TIFF 16-bit. Okay, Adobe Photoshop in CS6. You can tell it open saved image with. You can assign the software that you're going to open it with. I generally tend not to because I might want to open it in Lightroom. And I'll save that image. And from there, once it's saved, there it is. It will tell you, gives you, you can see that it adopts the name that you've given it. That tells you it's saved. I then close that. I come out of Photomatix Pro, and I will then go into Photoshop to complete my edit. Okay, well here we are, we're in Photoshop. I'm just going to recuperate the image that I've just created in Photomatix Pro. Here we are. There you can see it's huge on my screen. All I'm going to do in Photoshop is add a watermark. You can go into all of the changes and additional edits if you so desire, but I'm not going to get too complicated in that for this particular overview. But all I'm going to do is just put it in, get this image ready to post online. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to reduce the size a little bit. Let's say I want to have it 1200 maximum width. Okay, that will bring it to a more manageable size here on the screen. I'm happy with all of the changes that were made. I mean, the sharpness is fine, the image tone is fine. You can do all of those changes in Photoshop. It's way too complex for me to go into Photoshop right now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my little watermark on this guy and then save it for the web. Pixel Hobo Photography. Yep, that's me. Pixel Hobo Photography. Let's give it a little bit of a whiz. I know, a little bit of an idea. Let's put it to a nice orange colour. Maybe that will reflect or continue the design or the aesthetic of Miops Trigger. I generally tend to type my grammar and special characters separately, because with this particular font they tend not to line up too well. Anyway, okay, I want to merge these two together now, so I'll just simply make the main image invisible and I will merge the visible, reopen or re-emerge the image, and you'll see that these two elements now are locked together. I can change the opacity of that so they're not too overbearing. Let's just go to 50%. There you go. Still visible, less distracting, ready to save for the web. Now, because it was saved as a 16-bit TIFF, obviously that's quite a large size. I want to reduce the memory or the physical memory size of this image. So first off, I'm going to go and change it to 8-bit, and then what I want to do is I want to save it as a JPEG, so I'll save it for web. Okay, this then brings it down to a very handy 335.2K. It's 75% quality. Let's go ahead and save that, give it a name and a destination. I'm going to change that, say Under the Bridge. Cool. There we go, Under the Bridge, tone map JPEG, save, and there we are. That's my image ready to go for the web. So this brings to a conclusion my journey through the capture and edit of high dynamic range photography with the Miops Trigger. It is a product that, if you really want to take your imaging to the next level, your creative imaging to the next level, I sincerely suggest that you go out and grab yourself one. It's a great piece of gear. You can't go wrong. So I'm just going to say thank you. Thank you for stopping by and watching this short tutorial. And in the future, I'm sure to be doing a few more tutorials about the capability of the Miops Trigger, and I hope that you'll catch those too. All right, well, this is Mark from Pixel Hobo Photography signing off, wishing you all the best. Now get out and get shooting.